You're listening to the Magnetic Boss Podcast. I'm your host, Calandra Martin, intuitive brand designer for spiritual entrepreneurs. The Magnetic Boss Podcast is where visionaries come together to openly share wisdom and authentic conversations. I know that you are ready to leave your legacy in the world and become sought out in your industry. I also know that you are sick and tired of getting overlooked. You're ready to have a magnetic business. I'm here to help you create your magnetic brand. It's my mission to help you show up confidently with a professional, irresistible online presence. If you're in this for the long game and all in on the big vision you have for your business, let's dive in. Hello and welcome back. I am in awe of the fact that I am recording the very beginning of Season 5 of the Magnetic Boss Podcast for you today. This has been a long time coming. I have been feeling like every time I think I'm going to record an episode, life comes up, business gets busy, some sort of excuse lands into my lap, and then the episode doesn't get recorded. So I am no excuses recording this episode today, and I don't have any structure or format as usual on the podcast, because I want this to be free-flowing and intuitive-led, and I want you to be in this space listening to this podcast with excitement for what might come through for you. So let me reintroduce you to the Magnetic Boss Podcast. This is a space for spiritual and visionary entrepreneurs, women who are doing big freaking things in the world, and we're here for authentic conversations, raw conversations, strategic conversations, and everything in between. Something that I find with this podcast is that it goes through seasons, not only specifically with the seasons, but also with the content, where we are talking conversation style, and then we are also teaching and sharing and leading. So take what you will with this podcast, leave the rest. But if anything resonates with you as you're listening, I always ask of you to share the podcast. This podcast is a labor of love. I do it because I enjoy it. I do it because I hear from those of you that tune in that it is beneficial to you, and I want to continue to do more of that. And as the podcast grows, my ability to pour the time, energy, and attention into the podcast also grows. So I appreciate you sharing with your friends, with your colleagues, posting it on social media, whatever avenue feels best for you. So I wanted to do a quick reintroduction of the podcast today, and also give you a bit of a teaser as to what is to come on the podcast as the episodes are releasing. Now, if you've been listening for the last couple of years, if you've been listening season 1 through 4, you know that I am an entrepreneur who is all over the place all the time. Entrepreneur, mom, wife, human being who is a real human being, and I allow for that here on the podcast. So you won't see a specific schedule for the Magnetic Boss Podcast. That being said, I do have the intention of releasing at least 2 episodes every month. And something that's been really interesting leading up to season 5 of the podcast is this deep desire for me to be having more conversations. I love these solo episodes where I am just speaking to you directly, but I also really love bringing in other people, different perspectives, the stories that they have to share, because I know there's so much value in that, both for you as a listener and for me, because of course podcasting helps with networking and growing relationships. So I'm excited for that to come. And as we were leading up to season 5 of the podcast, I had pitched the idea of doing more collaborations on my platforms. I posted this on Threads, I posted this on Facebook, I think I even posted it on Instagram, in some Facebook groups, and I got an astounding amount of people that were eager to come speak on the Magnetic Boss Podcast. So currently, as I'm recording this episode, in this time frame, we are working through all of those requests and finding the guests that are going to be most aligned for these types of conversations. As much as I would love to interview every single person that reached out, it's definitely not manageable within my schedule to have that many conversations. But I am saving everybody's inquiries and will be working through those as I'm able to. So if you applied to be a guest on the podcast, which if you're a listener of this podcast and you want to be involved in the conversation, fill out the form. I will put that in the show notes. You can apply to be a guest, and I'm always reaching out to people in order of what feels good, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that you're not a good fit. It just means that with the podcast and the episodes that are coming up, I try to tailor this so that the conversations make sense for the listener. So I am working through all of those applications. I am figuring out where in my schedule it makes the most sense to be hosting these interviews and talking with people. As many of you know, if you've been listening to the podcast, I'm a busy mom of 3. We homeschool our oldest son, and we just got a nanny about a month ago, and she is fantastic. She is helping us part-time. So now I am rediscovering what my schedule is going to look like and how I can be planning out the opportunities to have interviews and record podcasts. As you're listening right now, I am sitting in my car outside of the coffee shop, knowing that recording this podcast is a non-negotiable. So more of that to come. Again, I'm working through the interview application, so there will be some really incredible conversations happening on the podcast, lots of valuable and just wisdom-filled conversations. So I'm excited for that. The other thing that I want to give you some teasers on is what is happening in my business and how that's going to reflect the topics on the podcast. So if you have been listening over the years, you probably know a bit about me. And if you listen to the intro of this podcast, you also know a bit about me. I am an intuitive brand designer and a social media manager for spiritual and visionary entrepreneurs, aka you. And within the umbrella of everything that I do, there are lots of subtopics. So on this podcast, we're talking about branding, we're talking about marketing, we're talking about social media and trends, but we're also diving into the mindset and the energetics of it all. There is so much nuance when it comes to branding, and there are so many areas to explore within business that I want to be able to share on this podcast. So even though every expert in the world will tell you need to niche down and be really specific, I am very clear in my niche in the sense that I know who I'm talking to, but I also know that you have a lot of things that you are managing as an entrepreneur and as a visionary. And my goal for this podcast is to inspire you, is to be the trailblazer that is leading the way for you, to be trying things out and seeing what works and bringing you along the journey with me. I am the type of expert who doesn't claim to be an expert in anything. Although I know a lot about branding and a lot about marketing, I also know that you're going to be using your own discernment when it comes to making decisions in your business. And I want you to be able to trust your intuition and trust your own path and the evolution of your business and your brand. So that is what we are going to be exploring here on the podcast. Again, there's so many subtopics within that. My hope is that there is a podcast episode out there for everyone so that you can listen to this no matter what stage of your journey you are at, whether you are just starting out as a beginner entrepreneur or you're making multiple 7 figures. Because through my own journey, I have found that the lessons that you learn as a beginner entrepreneur are still valid when you're making multiple 7 figures. You have to understand that your evolution is the process is to take 3 steps back, 1 step forward, 3 steps back, right? That's the quote that you hear a lot of the time. And that quote, in my perspective, is not meant to discourage you, but rather to show you that there's always going to be lessons that you are learning. Even if you have, quote unquote, healed something in your life or your business, the universe is going to continue to test you and to put things in front of you and present things to you that are going to challenge you again. So my hope for these episodes is that no matter where you're at in your journey, it will still be applicable for you. And I have deep trust that whatever I am saying on the podcast is going to reach you at the right time, right? The message is going to reach you when you need it, even if you didn't know that you needed it. So something I love about podcasts and podcasting is that it is a way for you to be connected and to feel inspired. And also, it's a bit of an adventure. When I'm listening to podcasts myself, I'm a big podcast listener. I love listening to music too, but I find if I'm alone in my car, I'm almost always going for a podcast, especially if my kids aren't in the car so that I can hear the podcast. But I love listening to podcasts simply for the fact that I never know what I'm going to take away from a conversation. I never know what I'm going to learn. Even if I click on an episode and it is something relevant to my expertise, I still leave myself open to the idea that I'm going to learn something new or take something away from that conversation that is going to open a door for me. So as you're listening to this podcast moving forward, I really encourage you to be open to the possibilities. And this goes for anything in your life, anything in your business. Be open to the possibility. This is going to allow you to be manifesting things into your life that much quicker and easier. Because when you have an idea of what you want, you tap into the energy of what you desire, and then you remain open to the possibilities, you're able to manifest what you wanted or more, right? This or something else, this or something better. And I really take this to heart in my life. If you know me at all and you know our journey through life with 3 kids, there have been lots of things that have flown into my world that I didn't expect, or things that I had hoped for that didn't work out. And I know and I trust that in that journey, it was not meant for me, right? Because there's something better, there's something different. So that was a very woo-woo way of explaining the podcast, but I really hope that it opens up your perspective of what to expect here. Because yes, I am all for tangible strategies. I am all for noticing marketing trends and understanding what's working in the industry. But I also know that at the end of the day, everything in our world is energy. Everything that we create is something that we are actively and even subconsciously creating ourselves. So we're going to explore so much of that here. A little bit of the woo, a little bit of the strategy. We're marrying the two together. We're going to have really incredible conversations, solo episodes as well. I love using this podcast as an opportunity to update those of you that are following along on my own personal journey. So there will be some solo episodes sprinkled in. And I'm always open to your feedback. I'm always open to you sharing a topic that you want to hear more about. I want you to reach out to me in the DMs if you have a specific question or you need me to elaborate on something, because I really treat this podcast as I would a masterclass or a workshop. If I were sitting in front of you and could teach you anything, I want to deliver and over-deliver. So anything that you ask me here on the podcast, you can expect me to be unfiltered, to give you everything. I'm not going to just call you into a paid offer, although I have those too. But I want this to be a space where you can learn, where you can connect, and you can feel like this is really beneficial for you in your life and your business. So I'm rambling. That is why I have a podcast, because I like to talk. When I get talking and get flowing, it's hard to shut me up. I want to invite you, if you haven't already, to subscribe to the podcast if this is sounding like your jam, if this is something that intrigues you. And if it is, share it with a friend, share it with a colleague, post it on social media, and stay tuned, because the next real episode is coming to you very soon, and I cannot wait for you to listen.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe wherever you are listening so you never miss a beat. For episode show notes, visit calandramartin.com/podcast. Your iTunes reviews and your sharing of the show helps us reach more magnetic bosses just like you. Until next time.